Welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. After a big week last week, man. We had quite the audience and quite the information, and it sure sounds like you're gonna blow last week out of the water, Ian. So my buddy Ian McBean's here. I talk to people all over the state here that watch this show, and they really like the show itself and what it's about. And we're really getting into the exciting part, the postseason, where not only are we going to work through the WPIAL, we're going to like morph into the the PIAA edition of the WPIAL Blitz Show. So it is what it is. The floor is yours, my friend. Let's go.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. And we've got a lot of content to go through this week. So we'll start by wrapping up some of the stuff that happened last week in week 9. We talked about there were 5 conference titles still to be decided and 15 playoff spots still open in the WPIAL. So just running through those quickly here. And then we'll get into talking about all of the teams that did qualify for the playoffs. So, if you're watching, you know where to find us. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook too. WPIAL Blitz on Facebook.
Yeah, I've heard a couple people, my daughters especially out that way have kind of gotten in touch with that. So good stuff.
Yes. So 2 of the biggest results of the week were obviously the 2 games that had conference titles on the line. Last week we talked to McKeesport's head coach, and they were riding high after beating Thomas Jefferson. And we talked to Bell Vernon's coach earlier in the year, and right after they had beat Thomas Jefferson, and the 2 collided with the conference title on the line, and Bell Vernon came out on top. McKeesport really struggled to slow down the sort of 2-headed beast of Devin Whitlock and Quentin Martin in Bell Vernon's backfield, which was, just outstanding performances from those 2. Once again, they've been doing it all year. They continue to do it. Bell Vernon's just a machine right now, and, obviously got the top seed in the 4A playoffs, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah.
And then Steel Valley, one of the bigger surprises, I would say, Steel Valley really handling Sarah Catholic. I thought Sarah was the second best team in 2A, and Steel Valley really just took it to them impressively on defense. I mean, Max Rocco, Sarah's quarterback, who's had a great year, just had no time to throw all game. Steel Valley's defense was all over him the entire time and really just swallowed up Sarah's offense, which has some really good skill players on it. And Steel Valley just ran all over Sarah's defense. And then the one time Steel Valley got a penalty and got forced into like a 1st and 20, and they ran a play action pass, and the guy was running wide open down the middle of Sarah's defense, and they hit him for like a 50-yard touchdown. So like the one pass they threw all game went for a touchdown. But yeah, impressive performance by Steel Valley, and we'll talk more about them later, because Steel Valley actually surprisingly got the number 1 seed in the 2A playoffs over Stowe Rocks, which was a shock to I think everybody. And so congratulations to the Ironmen being undefeated, getting back into the playoffs after missing it the last 2 years, and for a good performance over Sarah Catholic.
I think, just interjecting on both of those, and I sensed it in your voice, but not the victory, but the margin of victory and the dominance of victory in those 2 big wins, I think were the story, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was. Yes. I mean, if both of them had won close games, I wouldn't have really been surprised, but both of them really, handling their opponent and blowing them out was the biggest surprise. So we'll talk about the upset of the week, that South Allegheny, who came in with just 3 wins on their slate. I think they were 3-6 coming into the game against Mount Pleasant. South Allegheny needed a win to secure a playoff spot for the first time since 2012. And Mount Pleasant was like 6-3 coming in. So it would seem like a 3-6 team against a 6-3 team that Mount Pleasant would have the edge. But South Allegheny closed out Veterans Memorial Stadium down in Glassport in style. So they're getting a brand new turf field next year. So goodbye to Veterans Stadium down in Glassport, and also goodbye to the Pit in Aliquippa, historic stadium, but had really fallen into disrepair over the years. Aliquippa is getting a brand new stadium next year as well.
Wow,
so
good for them.
Yeah, great for them. A couple years ago, Aliquippa had actually closed the visitors' bleachers because they were declared a safety hazard. So like everybody had to sit on the one side of the field, and it was in bad shape. But they're getting a brand new entire stadium complex, so great
Wow.
for Aliquippa. Some of the other results to run through. These are were all games that were for playoff spots on the line. So Plum, Montour, Burrell, New Brighton, Beth Center, Burgettstown, Monessen, and Springdale all won win and get in casket match playoff games. And the games of the week that I want to talk about here now. Last week we talked about Upper St. Clair has now won 2 games in the craziest fashion I can remember. Last week they came back from 28-13 down to beat South Fayette on they threw a touchdown pass with no time left on the clock, and it was an untimed down because they got a pass interference call on the last play of regulation. But as you know, half can end on a defensive penalty.
Sure.
So they got a free play, threw a touchdown pass to tie it against South Fayette last week. And then in overtime, Ethan Heister blocked South Fayette's field goal. And then Upper St. Clair came back and kicked a field goal and won that game. Fast forward to this week, they're playing Bethel Park. Bethel Park, it's tied 14-14, is driving down the field with about 20 seconds left. Bethel Park lines up for a game-winning field goal. And guess what happens? Ethan Heister again blocks it, and Upper St. Clair returns it for a touchdown to win the game 21-14 on a blocked field goal return. I've called Upper St. Clair they're the Panthers, but I've called them the cardiac cats for a while because they just find these ways to win games in thrilling and exciting fashion. And man, they have certainly lived up to being the cardiac cats.
I can't
the
even
last 2
imagine.
weeks.
I couldn't have even imagined being on this, the sidelines for something like that. I
Yeah.
couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to do maybe one better then, because Washington and McGuffey, these teams combined for over 900 yards of total offense. The lead changed 9 times. Washington was up 25-20 at the beginning of the fourth quarter. McGuffey scored to go back in front. Washington scored with about 5 minutes left to take a 33-26 lead. McGuffey drove back down the field and scored with 20 seconds left, went for 2 and made it to take a 34-33 lead. And then Washington they returned the kickoff back to around midfield. And this,
you just have to show us the end.
I have to show you the end because this also sets up our Brute Athletic Player of the Week, who is, not to spoil it, but Davon Fuse from Washington. So he's the quarterback here. Washington gets the ball, midfield, 20 seconds left. Fuse rolls out, runs it up the sideline.
He was looking for just got it up the side.
Got out of bounds, into position, 20. So like 5 seconds left here now. And from 29 yards out, he throws a touchdown pass back to the middle of the field with no time left on the clock for Washington to come back and beat McGuffey in incredible fashion, and to win the conference title. I should add too that game was had the conference title was on the line.
That is just incredible.
So on the whole,
my God,
Davon Fuse had 263 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 rushing touchdowns. So that a fitting performance, not just to lead them the whole way back at the end of the game with 20 seconds left, basically all on his own, but also, over 300 yards of total offense, 6 total touchdowns. I mean, just what a performance in a game to win the conference title too. I mean, that's, the stakes can't get higher.
Those are memories that he'll never forget. I mean, throughout his entire life. I mean, he'll never forget that, as you will never forget, these games. We'll be hearing about this game probably 2 years from now, and the WPIAL Blitz show when it comes down to, Washington winning a conference. Well, not since Damon Fuse had that late. That's good stuff, Ian.
Yeah. So some of our other top performers this week: Sam Miller from Peters Township in a game with a playoff spot on the line. They needed to win, and they did it over South Fayette. Had 289. That should just say passing yards. Sorry, I was typing over last week's stuff. Should be 289 passing yards, passing touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown. Joey Prentice for North Catholic threw for 5 touchdowns and had 1 rushing touchdown. Devin Whitlock from Bell Vernon got the scoring started with a punt return touchdown. And we talked about that last week, right after Matt Miller left the show. We said, he didn't talk about it, but they got to be careful punting to him. And they punted to him right away on the first drive, and he ran it back for a touchdown.
Yeah, and sometimes they're not doing that deliberately. I mean, but still, you make a mistake and you're going to pay.
That's like the 3rd or 4th punt return touchdown Whitlock has had this year. And I've said all along, he's one of the most exciting players in the WPIAL with the ball in his hands. The other one is Rodney Gallagher from Laurel Highlands, who actually also joined the 1,000 club this week. They beat Uniontown in a non-conference game, and he got the 163 rushing yards that he needed to get over the 1,000 mark. So congratulations to Rodney. And then Mateo Sapolio from Upper St. Clair scored all 3 of their touchdowns in that win over, or accounted for all 3 of their touchdowns in the win over Bethel Park. A rushing touchdown. He threw for a touchdown on kind of a trick play, and then he returned that blocked field goal that Ethan Heister blocked for the game-winning touchdown.
Well, Mateo Sapolio has got my nod for name of the year. So
there's quite a few good names out there.
There's quite a few good names, but Mateo Sapolio, that's a good one.
Yeah, I think Capone Jones, quarterback from Clairton, might be mine.
Okay. Mateo Sapolio. So we'll have to keep that in mind as we go through the postseason. We'll have to come up with like the player with the best name that we have here. Yeah. So all right.
Springdale has a quarterback named Legend too. His first name is Legend,
huh?
Yeah,
okay.
Very good. Yeah.
All right.
Anyways, our streak watch here as we move into the playoffs.
A little red on the page this week.
We had 2 teams that had playoff streaks come to an end. Mars's 16-year streak came to an end, and South Fayette's 12-year streak came to an end. But as I predicted on our preseason show, my bold prediction was that Leechburg would end their 32-year playoff drought, and they did in style. They beat Greensburg Central Catholic this week to actually finish 3rd in the playoffs. They're going to get a home playoff game, which will be their first
incredible
home playoff game in school history. So that's pretty cool too.
That is great.
And then Burrell and South Allegheny also got in for the first time since 2012.
That's great. I just love to hear that. That is such a great story about, that team that didn't, made the playoff for so long. Not only did they just sneak in, but then a home playoff game.
Yeah.
That place is going to be rocking.
It is. It's going to be great. So that's a good segue because let's talk about the playoffs now. So as you can see, most of the teams that qualified for the playoffs came from Allegheny County, kind of centrally located, but we have a good distribution across all the WPIAL counties being represented, in the playoffs as we go through. I think there's 73 teams in total across the 6 classifications that made the playoffs. So, yes. So just a little bit of playoff history here to remind people as we go through and talk about it. So when the WPIAL was first founded back in 1914, they had 1 classification. And then when they started labeling them, it became AA and then single A, and then they had Class B. And then in the 1973, they kind of relabeled them. So Class B became Class A became AA, and AA became AAA. In 1980, the state split into 4 classifications. And then in 1988, obviously, was when the state tournament started to come into effect. And then in 2016, when we split into 6 classifications, it got split a little further apart. One thing I will note here, which is just because it's a pet peeve of mine, teams that were in Quad A from 1980 to 2015 are not the same as schools that are in 4A now. So it really bugs me when I see a list of like Quad A or 4A champions and it lists like, Central Catholic, Thomas Jefferson. I'm like, no, it's not the same, because these correct. 4A teams are like just above the 50% mark in enrollment. They're not the same as what were the biggest schools.
Yeah.
So as we go through, anything that happened in this era will be labeled this way, like with A's, basically with Quad A, Triple A, Double A, Single A. Anything that's happened in the 6 classification era will be labeled with a number and a letter, just so we can kind of differentiate when it happened.
And the cool part is that I think there's only one color that kind of goes from 2 blocks, and that's the AAA from 1973-79 goes to AAA 1980, 2015. Everything else is a unique color, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I did that intentionally. And actually, and actually, this color coding stays throughout the rest of the presentation as well,
Yeah,
or through the
we love
slides.
it.
So I'm very meticulous about those things. So let's
I
talk
love
about
it, man.
6A.
And you know what? Like I said, man, this is the show for football geeks in Pennsylvania. That's all I know.
Yeah. So looking at the bracket, and we'll go team by team in a minute, but the biggest surprise here really was Seneca Valley beat North Allegheny last week. So that dropped North Allegheny back down into the first round game against Cannon McMillan. Mount Lebanon couldn't be happy about that, potentially having to see North Allegheny in the semifinals. But other than that, Mount Lebanon really rolled through the season. Top ranked offense, top ranked defense, beat everyone by at least 21 points. And Mount Lebanon dominant so far. But since we're talking about them, they are the #1 overall seed and won their first conference championship since 2010, first perfect regular season since 2010, but they haven't been to a WPIAL championship game since 2000 when they last won a title. So, they've reached the semifinals in the last 3 years, but really have to get over that hump. They have the leading passer, Joey Daniels, leading rusher, Alex Texa, and leading receiver, Eli Heidenreich in 6A. They have like I said, top ranked offense, top ranked defense. On paper, Mount Lebanon is the team to beat, but beating Central Catholic at Heinz Field is, you have to go out and do it. So, Mount Lebanon is the presumptive favorite, but Central Catholic is the 2-time defending WPIAL 6A champions. They've won 5 of the last 8 WPIAL titles. So, I'm sorry, I should back up. They're not playing the 6A championship game at Heinz Field because it happens the week before. The WPIAL 6A champion enters the state bracket at the quarterfinals. All the other WPIAL champions enter in the semifinals. So the 6A championship game has to be the weekend where all the other classifications are having their semifinals. But nevertheless, championship games at Norwin, still beating Central Catholic in a WPIAL title game is something a completely different animal than beating them in the regular season. Central's lost games in the regular season before, like last year they lost to both Mount Lebanon and North Allegheny, and then they came back and beat them both in the playoffs. So Central's a very good defense. They actually have thrown the ball a bit more this year than they have in past years. And they've got a good, well-rounded team. They should handle Seneca Valley pretty well in the first round, and make their way. Or I guess they got to bye to the semifinals, which so did Mount Lebanon. So we'll see what happens. Seneca Valley, like I mentioned, beat North Allegheny last week, 17-12, bit of a surprise. But they have reached 2 of the last 5 WPIAL championship games, actually upset North Allegheny both of those times in the semifinals. Both of those years, North Allegheny was the top seed in the playoffs and Seneca Valley upset them. So, it's possible, but they also got thumped like 35-0 by Central Catholic earlier this year. So Seneca Valley has probably the best tandem of wide receivers in 6A in Luke Lawson and Brandon Ross, really good players. We interviewed Seneca Valley's offensive coordinator earlier this year. And a really good season for them. I mean, to finish 3rd in the conference, and especially they overcame an injury to their quarterback. Graham Hancock's got injured and Sean O'Shea stepped in, done really well, really good passing attack. But going up against Central's defense,
kind of like my dark horse team in 6A, quite honestly.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go by seed line, North Allegheny is probably a good pick as well, since they have to play in that 4-5 play-in game. North Allegheny is always a very well-rounded, very well-coached team. 18 consecutive playoff appearances. They'd made the semifinals in 4 straight years and lost every time before finally making it to the WPIAL title game last year, where they lost to Central Catholic. But they had that really good run about a decade ago where they won 3 straight WPIAL titles and 2 state titles in 3 years. I think they reached the championship game the 3rd year. I think they made it to 3 straight state championship games. So, it was a really good run. Haven't quite made it back to that pinnacle, but still a very dangerous team out of that 4 seed spot. Cannon McMillan got the last playoff spot. They only have 1 playoff win in school history. I guess technically this should probably read as 111 or 110-1 because I didn't count Cannonsburg High School, which preceded Cannon McMillan before a merger, tying before there was overtime, right? So there wasn't overtime before 1988, before the state tournament. That was when overtime started in Pennsylvania high school football. And so they just had, like, if you tied, you just tied. Like, there wasn't anyone to, if back in before 1970 in the WPIAL, they just like picked the top two teams in the classification and had them play for the championship. It was all based on Gardner points, which was a sort of preliminary to your power ranking system and all that. And they just sort of picked the top two teams and said, you're playing for the championship. So if you tied, they just awarded co-champions. That's just what it was before they first expanded the playoffs in 1970. But so Cannonsburg High School had tied back in 1950 for the Class A championship. So they can claim one title in their history. This year, Cannon McMillan finished with a 2-5 record in conference and actually tied Baldwin and Norwin for that 5th place spot, but they won the tiebreaker for the last playoff spot. Cannon Mac looked like a really good team early in the year, but then their running back Ryan Angott got hurt and just kind of struggled since then to close out the season. So we'll see what happens in the playoffs. I fully expect North Allegheny to handle them pretty well and, to set up a Mount Lebanon North Allegheny showdown in the semifinals. So just looking back at the bracket, like I mentioned, I'm expecting North Allegheny to win. I would bet on a Mount Lebanon Central Catholic championship game. Mount Lebanon beat Central by 21.
You like Central Catholic though, to win it all.
It's, it actually, no, my preseason pick was Mount Lebanon. My preseason pick was Mount Lebanon to win it all. And I would love to see Mount Lebanon win it all.
Well, then why? It's just, this was your team. Yet it seems like every time I'm sitting there like trying to reemphasize that I think Mount Lebanon is the champ, and you're like, well, let me,
I've seen, the thing is, I've seen Central do it so many times in the playoffs when, they lost a couple regular season games. They weren't the top overall seed, and they just, they find a way to come out and do it in the playoffs. Like last year. Like I said, they've won, what was it, 5 of the last 8 championships or something like that. And I think 2 of the other ones were won by Pine Richland. So, or maybe all 3 of the other ones were won by Pine Richland, who's not even in 6A anymore. So, I think it was all 3 of the other ones. Yeah. So, it's beating Central Catholic in the playoffs is a difficult proposition. And I know Mount Lebanon did it in the regular season. And really, I'll say this, the regular season game they played, it was that weekend where we had the lightning storms roll through. The game got delayed. So they played like half of it on Friday night and half of it on Saturday morning. Mount Lebanon had a 21-7 lead when they went to break and really had controlled the game. That Central returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown to go up 7-0. And then Mount Lebanon scored the next 21 points and was really dominating them. And then Saturday morning rolled around and Mount Lebanon just kept kicking the snot out of them. And Mount Lebanon was up 35-7, and Central scored a late touchdown with like a minute left to make it 35-14, which was Mount Lebanon's closest game of the year, which was a kickoff return for a touchdown. And, a late touchdown after the game was already 35-7. So, that Mount Lebanon's, their offense, their defense, and the thing is, defense travels in the playoffs. And I think that's the biggest thing about Mount Lebanon. It's easy to find stats on offensive players. And yet you've never, you
just read chapter and verse the reason why Mount Lebanon would be, why we had the argument about the fact that I called them a prohibitive favorite and you wouldn't sign up for that. Never mind. That's
they're
okay.
The favorite, but
that's why this is a show, because you got to have like differing opinions and everything else. So, but
yeah.
Anyway,
so,
we both like Mount Lebanon.
Yes. Yeah. My preseason pick was Mount Lebanon over Central Catholic in the title game. And I would stick with that. If I had to pick today, I would still pick Mount Lebanon over Central Catholic in the championship game. I'm just saying that, I think it's going to be closer than 21 points is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah. Moving on to 5A, Moon, the only undefeated team in 5A, got the top overall seed. Little bit of controversy here that, so Pine Richland, Penn Hills, and North Hills if I can talk, Pine Richland, Penn Hills, North Hills, all tied for the Northeast Conference title with a 4-1 conference record. Technically, based on the WPIAL's tiebreaker system, Penn Hills should have been the, should have been the conference champion. They would have won the tiebreaker in that 3-way tie scenario. But the WPIAL selection committee seeded Pine Richland 3rd, Gateway 4th, and Penn Hills 5th, and then North Hills 6th. And the reason I believe they did that was that, yes, Pine Richland beat Penn Hills beat North Hills beat Pine Richland. Those three all kind of beat each other. But Gateway lost to Pine Richland and beat Penn Hills. So once you added those non-conference games into the mix as far as seeding considerations went, they said, okay.
But they're not supposed to, okay?
No. So they can do it for seeding. It's for
they can do it when they want to. It's just like they don't have to, right?
No, it's for playoff qualification that only the conference games count. But when the selection committee seeds the teams, they're not seeded by any formula. They're seeded by a group of people, like the NCAA tournament is. They can seed teams as they see fit, right? Mm-hmm. So right. what they said was, okay, Moon was the Allegheny 6 conference champions. Penn Trafford was the Big East Conference champions, and then you had your 3-way tie atop the Northeast Conference. But once you count in the non-conference games, Pine Richland beat Gateway beat Penn Hills. Pine Richland also beat Penn Hills. So that's why they seeded them. Pine Richland beat both Gateway and Penn Hills, so they gave them the number 3 seed. Gateway beat Penn Hills head-to-head. They gave them the number 4 seed, and then Penn Hills beat North Hills head-to-head. So that's how they got to 5 and 6.
Look, I love the human element. Okay, I mean, I'm a big fan of that. Okay, but it's kind of awkward that you can or can't bring the human element in whenever you feel like. But that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. Look, the one thing that I can say about how the WPIAL selects the teams that make the tournament is it's entertaining. So
yeah. So and just to clarify, I know our audience is largely WPIAL people, but there are some statewide people.
We got a lot of statewide people now, pal. I can tell you that.
The teams qualify based on the order of finish in their conference. So in 5A, there were 3 conferences. The top 4 teams from each conference qualified, and then the WPIAL seeded those teams. They took those 12 teams and are able to seed them in whatever order they want to. So then the WPIAL seeds them into the bracket is how it works. So the means of qualification is determined, but the means of seeding is up to the WPIAL selection.
Up to the tournament selection committee.
Yes. Okay. So to run through these teams, Moon is the favorite as the only unbeaten team in 5A. This is their second conference title in the last 3 years. We talked to the head coach, Ryan Lynn, earlier this year about the turnaround that they've had. And so congratulations to the Tigers on getting the top overall seed in the tournament. Have been absolutely dominant defensively this season. And the other thing I'll note here, as we go through some of these other classifications, is that the scoring in 5A was a lot lower than in every classification. You only had 3 teams that were averaging over 30 points per game. Whereas in other classifications, you had a lot more than that. And so just keep an eye on that as we move forward too.
Well, I think that's a function of the competitive balance.
Yeah,
I mean, the competitive balance of the teams,
And as we go through, there's not one dominant team here either. That I think 5A is probably the most wide open. Moon's obviously the favorite, being undefeated, but I think it's wide open the way the bracket sets up. Penn Trafford is the number 2 seed, has the most playoff appearances of any team in the WPIAL to never win a WPIAL title. They've lost in the championship game 3 times. And then if you count in Penn Joint and Trafford High School, the 2 teams that merged to form Penn Trafford, that would be 0-5 in WPIAL finals. Wow. But they've got a great team this year. Their running back, Cade Yakimelli, is a Wisconsin commit. And they've got a quarterback in Carter Green, who's one of the top lacrosse players in the state. And I think he threw for over 900 yards and ran for over 800 yards this year. So just an all-around good player, a really good offensive line, and a good defense for Penn Trafford. effort as well. Third straight conference title for the Warriors out in the Big East Conference. Pine Richland is the number 3 seed. Obviously, they've kind of been the biggest storyline in the WPIAL this season with, dismissing their whole coaching staff in the offseason and then, starting out 0-3 with 3 losses against 6A teams and then kind of turned it around once they started playing against 5A opponents. Have arguably the best linebacker in the WPIAL and Jeremiah Hazley, who's a Duke commit. And a good defensive team. They've struggled a little offensively in recent weeks, but part of that's their quarterback, Cole Boyd, got hurt.
How is he? How is he doing?
Rumor has it he's going to be able to return for the playoffs. So them getting that first round bye probably helps them, buys them another extra week. Ryan Palmieri started to play pretty well the last couple of weeks, stepping in, but there's a difference. I'll say, Cole Boyd's a really good player. And I think if Cole Boyd plays, Pine Richland's capable of winning the championship again. If he doesn't play, they've got a lot of really good players. I don't want to, Brooks Eastburn and Alex Gochis and Jeremiah Hazley. This team is stacked all around, but it's just, can they gel together? Or will the injuries catch up with them? Because all those guys I just mentioned have also missed a game or two here or there with injury as well, which all kind of came together when they played North Hills and they had a bunch of guys out. But
he's a talented kid. Boyd's a talented kid, and I saw him up close and personal actually at camp out here last year. He was clearly the best guy there. So
so we'll see what happens with Pine Richland's team and how it all comes together in the playoffs. Gateway is the number 4 seed. They've won a couple recent WPIAL championships, obviously in 2019 and 2017. 2017, they made it all the way to the state championship game before they lost. Have a really good quarterback in Brad Birch, who's only a sophomore. Already has an Oregon offer, which is impressive for a sophomore quarterback after he transferred from Jeanette last year.
Sophomore Pennsylvania quarterback,
Yeah. And he led the WPIAL in passing this year. It was wide receiver Patrick Bodie is going to Cincinnati as a defensive back. Gateway's been just really, really good all year. The
quietly, has anybody really been talking? That quietly led the WPIAL in passing as a sophomore. That's incredible.
It is. Yeah. And I think so. The one other thing I'll note here, and it'll come into play a little bit more later. So I mentioned that Brad Birch and his older brother, Brett Birch, transferred from Jeanette this past year. Jeanette lost a lot of guys to transfer. And because of the PIAA's transfer rules, his older brother, Brett, who's a wide receiver, will not be eligible to play in the playoffs. But Brad, because he's only a sophomore and transferred before his 10th grade season, will be eligible to play in the playoffs. So that actually comes into play a lot for Greensburg Central Catholic down in 1A. They're losing like 4 or 5 guys that transferred from transferred from Jeanette. That won't be eligible for the playoffs. So just something to keep an eye on with Gateway as well. But Gateway, really, really good, kind of quietly good team this year. I think, they lost that 15-10 defensive struggle to Pine Richland not Pine Richland. Sorry. They did lose to Pine Richland, but they also lost 15-10 to Penn Trafford. So, they've killed everybody since then. So I keep an eye out because this team's starting to come together. They could be one to make a run.
So this is your dark horse team.
Actually, my dark horse team might be Penn Hills because
what a great segue.
Yeah. Penn Hills got absolutely throttled the first 2 weeks of the season. They lost by a combined score of 89-20, and they played Central Catholic and Gateway the first 2 weeks of the year. So what's that? Giving up like 45 points a game those first 2 weeks. Since then, they've held opponents to just 15.5 points a game. They've really ramped it up defensively. Their sophomore quarterback, Julian Duggar, was our player of the week. 1 week, his older brother, Jaden Duggar, is a wide receiver and is one of the top defensive back recruits around. So Penn Hills has really ramped it up defensively, and Julian Duggar is starting to come into his own as a dual threat running and passing quarterback. And they're a young team too. They've got a couple sophomores, in starting roles in addition to Julian Duggar. So They're a team to keep an eye on, not just this year, but in the future. Obviously won the state championship a few years ago, but anytime those guys all got playing experience last year as freshmen, and now they're sophomores and really starting to hit their stride. So, watch out for them next year too. But for this year, they've got to play in that first round game, and they've got a potential rematch against Gateway in the second round. But, I think either whoever comes out of that Penn Hills Gateway game, I like their chances against Moon in the semifinals, just to give them a run for their money. I don't know if they're good enough to beat Moon, but I think they could definitely give them a run for their money.
Good.
Franklin Regional. So as we go through this here, I'm going to go matchup by matchup. So Penn Hills 5 seed playing Franklin Regional, the 12 seed in the first round. They got into the playoffs on that thrilling come from behind victory against Latrobe. You might remember a few weeks ago, Latrobe was up 40-13 right before halftime, and Franklin Regional threw that hook and ladder play, and then came back to cut it to 40-20 at halftime, and then came back from a 20-point deficit in the second half to win 41-20 or 41-40. It was the final there. So 1-point win over Latrobe was enough to get them into the playoffs. But they draw a Penn Hills team that's pretty hot right now in the first round.
And at 3-7, you don't give them much of a chance.
No, but they missed the playoffs last year for the first time since 2003. So this is a team that's perennially been in the playoffs, hasn't made a ton of deep runs.
But those are the ones you want to. Those are the ones you worry about. Let's just say if you were going to pick an upset, it might be with Franklin Regional.
Not yet. I have an upset pick here, but not yet. We'll get there. North Hills. Whose head coach we also interviewed earlier this year, had that big win over Pine Richland, finishing that 3-way tie, got the number 6 overall seed. 8th playoff appearance in the last 10 years, but they haven't won a playoff game in the last decade. So, when we talked to their coach, he talked a lot about, getting that first playoff win since 2010 was an important thing. They've got a good wide receiver in Robert Dickinson, who's a Bucknell commit, wide receiver, defensive back, kick returner. He kind of does it all for them. But their quarterback, John Green, has really kind of revolutionized their offense. When we talked to their head coach a few weeks ago, he said, we talked about how North Hills has traditionally just been a run the ball, ground and pound kind of team, but they've opened up the offense a little bit more because Green's allowed them to throw the ball because he's been so talented. So keep an eye out for that. But my upset pick here in a battle of Indians versus Indians is Peters Township, who has reached the last 2 WPIAL finals, got the number 11 seed because they just snuck in winning that, get in game against South Fayette this past week. But they're a team who early in the year, they beat Penn Trafford, who got the number 2 overall seed. And, Peters Township reached the last 2 championship games, but graduated pretty much everyone from that team, had to restock their starting lineup, have done so pretty well, got off to an 0-3 start in conference play, but bounced back to win pretty definitively the last 2 weeks. They beat West Allegheny 30-7, and then beat South Fayette last week 35-7. So, starting to get hot at the right time. And with that early season win over Penn Trafford too, I'm like, man, they can play with the big boys here. So, don't sleep on Peters Township at this number 11 seed. Upper St. Clair making the playoffs for the 22nd straight season after the Cardiac Cats, after those 2 thrilling victories that we talked about earlier in the show. Guaranteed to be a fun and thrilling game when Upper St. Clair is on the field. You never know what's going to happen, but it's going to be, they're always fun to watch. They're playing Fox Chapel in the first round. Fox Chapel hasn't won a playoff game since 1997. They got into the playoffs because they beat Kiski earlier this year, but they lost their last 3 in a row. They won their first 2 conference games over Shaler and Kiski by 14 points both times, and then lost their last 3 pretty definitively against Penn Hills, North Hills, and Pine Richland. So, we'll see what happens, but I like Upper St. Clair's chances in this first one, also because Fox Chapel plays in the Northeast Conference, and Upper St. Clair has gone out to Big East teams each of the last 5 years. So, I like their chances against the non-Big East team in the first round. And then the 8-9 game, we have Bethel Park, who missed the playoffs last year for the first time since 2000. And not just did they miss the playoffs, they went 0-7 last year. They didn't win a game last year. And now they got back into the playoffs. They had a game 2 weeks ago against Moon head-to-head with the conference title on the line. And they lost that one and then lost to Upper St. Clair this past week. But still a good Bethel Park team getting back into the playoffs, for the, what is it, I guess 20th time in the last 21 years. And they've reached the quarterfinals in 4 of the last 6 years. So we'll see what happens this year. And then they play Woodland Hills, who's always a perennial contender. They were also a team missed the playoffs in 2019 for the first time since 1995, but they were back in last year, back in again this year. And Woodland Hills started off, kind of slow. Won their week 0 game against a team from New Jersey, and then they lost 5 in a row. It was kind of like, what's going on with Woody High? And then they bounced back to win 3 of their last 4 to get back on track. They had a couple injuries, guys have come back. So Woodland Hills always a perennial contender. Never want to see that the sky blue and black on the opposite side, because you're in for a battle. But looking back at the bracket here, the Bethel Park Woodland Hills winner will take on Moon. I like Moon's chances to get to the semis. Gateway Penn Hills, they played a great game in the playoffs last year in the first round. And Gateway beat Penn Hills pretty definitively earlier this year, but I think Penn Hills is better now than they were then. So that'll be a heck of a quarterfinal game. I mentioned Upper St. Clair's lost the last 5 years to Big East teams. Well, look who's waiting for them in the second round, the Big East champions, Penn Trafford, who was actually, I think Gateway and Penn Trafford were my preseason picks to reach the title game. I don't remember who I picked to actually win it, but those are my picks to make it there. And so they've got a chance to make it there. And then, I like I said, I like Peter's chances to pull the upset on North Hills, and then we'll see what happens in a rematch. Would be a rematch of last year's championship game in a quarterfinal against Pine Richland. So
I guess,
wide
I'm
open
sorry.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking at as we go through all the brackets here is I'm going to be out there November 13th. So what I'm hoping is that I get like a afternoon evening doubleheader ability in playoffs out there, that I can catch 2 games, and so I'm already kind of licking my chops as far as like who I might be able to see when I come out there next week. I can't believe it's next week.
Yep. So moving on to 4A, Aliquippa was the top ranked team offensively and defensively, but Bell Vernon got the top overall seed as the unbeaten team. So Bell Vernon, top overall seed in the tournament, beat Thomas Jefferson early, beat McKeesport, and also Bell Vernon beat Penn Trafford, who is the number 2 overall seed in 5A. So really impressive season for Bell Vernon with Devin Whitlock, Quentin Martin, and just everyone else they have. They haven't won a WPIAL title since 1995. They've reached the semifinals the last 4 years, made the title game in 2019. These guys have been chomping at the bit. We talked to Matt Humbert earlier this year, their head coach, and he was a great interview. Highly recommend going back and watching that episode of the show. But it was they're chomping at the bit, and this might be the best Bell Vernon team since 1995. I think my preseason pick was Bell Vernon over Aliquippa in the title game. So they were the number 1 seed. Aliquippa was the number 2 seed. I think this was the 34th conference title in Aliquippa history. I mean, Aliquippa has been the premier program in the WPIAL. 17-time champions, 3-time state champions, 13 straight WPIAL championship games they've reached. That's just insane considering they're a single A size school playing up now in 4A that they got forced up into. Reached the title game last year and took Thomas Jefferson to overtime. TJ wound up winning the state title, but that's just how close Aliquippa was in a higher classification. And they're absolutely a threat to make it back to the title game this year. They have a potential semifinal against McKeesport, who had that big win over Thomas Jefferson. We interviewed their head coach, Matt Miller, last week, and they run that triple option wishbone attack. It's tough to defend. It's tough to match up with. Bobby Boyd, their running back, has been outstanding this season. He's only a junior. So, I mean, next year, if you want to talk about guys who might lead the WPIAL in rushing next year, Bobby Boyd should probably be at the top of that list. But McKeesport, semifinal against Aliquippa would be absolutely outstanding. I mean, those are not only 2 of the great fan bases and trash talkers around the region. I mean, it would just be two really good good teams and good programs coming together. And McKeesport's had a lot of success over the years as well. 24th consecutive playoff appearance. Oh, I should also mention that Aliquippa and Thomas Jefferson have the longest playoff streak in the WPIAL history, but also currently at 27 straight years. So they both last missed the playoffs in 1994. So they made it every year since then. Hampton got the number 4 seed, so a little bit of controversy here because the top
and we
3
talked
seeds,
to their coach this year too.
We did, and the top 3 seeds got buys in the 3A bracket. So the WPIAL wound up giving the number 3 seed to McKeesport, the second place team out of the Big 8 conference, rather than undefeated Hampton, who is the conference champion in the Greater Allegheny Conference. But honestly, I think that was probably the right seeding, because then you would have wound up with McKeesport, Thomas Jefferson, who got the number 5 seed, and Bell Vernon all in the same half of the bracket. So I think the WPIAL wanted to split them apart a little bit, which made more sense to me. So Hampton, great season. First conference title since 2014, second consecutive playoff appearance. Never reached a WPIAL championship game, only reached the semifinals once. So they're going to be, looking to make that run, potentially a historic run for their program. They're facing Plum, which in a rarity is a conference versus conference matchup in the first round. But with the Greater Allegheny Conference getting 5 teams in, Plum beat Greensburg-Salem the last week of the year, 30-27, to get into the playoffs. And I'll say this 3-7 record's a little bit deceiving, because Plum had to retroactively forfeit a win over Mars because they found out later they used a player that didn't have any eligibility left. So really they should have been 4-6. But if you'll recall, they made the semifinals last year. So still a dangerous team that had some players back. Eric Moore, their running back's really good. Plum could potentially be a somewhat dangerous team, but Hampton really handled them earlier this year, playing a team from their conference in the first round. I like Hampton's chances here. Thomas Jefferson, 2-time defending state champions at the number 5 seed, which sets up a really good quarterfinal potentially with Hampton. Like I said, 27 consecutive playoff appearances, 2-time defending WPIAL and state champions. So actually, they've won. They've won 5 of the last 6 WPIAL championship games. Yeah, 5 of the last 6 WPIAL championships. Their only loss was to South Fayette in the 2018 WPIAL final. But always a dangerous team in the playoffs. And they've won a couple championships, kind of like Central Catholic, where they lost to Bell Vernon in the regular season and came back and won the title that year. So TJ always dangerous in the playoffs. Their coach Bill Chirpak's won more WPIAL titles than any other coach, so he knows how to get it done in the playoffs. They're taking on Indiana, who had 2 made the playoffs. Which was your pick early in the year, Bruce. Good call.
That was like my kind of dark horse pick. You picked the one to break the streak, and I thought Indiana was actually going to make it, and they did.
They did, and two really good running backs for Indiana. Flint and Harrington. I don't know if they both topped 1,000 yards this season, but I know they both topped 900 yards. They had a really good rushing attack. It looks like both of them topped 900 yards this year, between Devin Flint and Zach Harrington. So, and then they had another guy who ran for almost 600 yards. So, really good running attack here for Indiana. Congratulations on making the playoffs for the 9th time in school history, but taking on Thomas Jefferson is a completely different animal in the playoffs.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Armstrong came in second in the Greater Allegheny Conference, got the number 6 overall seed. Their quarterback, Caden Olson, was one of the top passers in the WPIAL. So, this is their 4th playoff appearance since 2015, when their school was formed by the merger of Ford City and Katanning. So, still kind of building their program together after the merger, but they've had some success. 4 playoff appearances in 6 years. So, so far so good, but they haven't won a playoff game since the merger. So we'll see if they're able to get it this year, as they take on Montour, who won a win and get in game against Chartiers Valley the last week of the season. Won it 34-27. So a close matchup that Montour got into the playoffs this year. Montour's kind of been a perennially good program too, 13 playoff appearances in the last 15 years, reached the 2017 championship game, won the 2011 WPIAL title. So been pretty good over the years, but I think Armstrong has a pretty good chance in this one as well. to get their first playoff win in school history, which would be pretty cool for Armstrong. Beaver, one of the most exciting teams in 4A. I mean, Beaver won 2 games in overtime. The last 3 weeks of the season, they won 2 games in overtime and another one on a last second field goal. So, Beavers 4-1 in conference, 7-2 overall, but
never count them out.
never count them out. They made it back to the playoffs after missing for a few years. Kind of went through some struggles last year, but their quarterback, I guess we'll call him, Wyatt Ringer, was our player of the week once this year. He's pretty much a wildcat quarterback. He does more running than passing. It's more of a direct snap to a running back, but he's a force to be reckoned with, and a guy that is tough to stop. And they're going up against Laurel Highlands, who is making their first playoff appearance since 2015. One of the best years in school history. That's their first 5-0 start in school history. We interviewed their head coach, Rick Colasar, earlier this year. Their quarterback, Rodney Gallagher, one of the best 2-sport athletes in the WPIAL, has D1 offers in both football and basketball. He's only a junior. And I mentioned earlier, he joined that 1,000 club, both rushing and passing for 1,000 yards this season. So Laurel Highlands has also never won a playoff game. They're 0-10 in their history. So going for their first playoff win against the Beaver team that's played a bunch of close games. Laurel Highlands has scored a lot, but they've also given up a lot of points. So, this one potentially could be a pretty good matchup. And then the number 8 seed Highlands. Highlands has had a really roller coaster season, man. They won their first 4 games, and then they lost 3 in a row, and then they won their last 4 games to get into the playoffs. So, they turned it around late. Their quarterback, Chandler Timmons, a good dual threat guy. Luke Bombowski, their running backs, been a good player too. So they got a home playoff game. Congratulations to the Rams. And they take on a Newcastle team that also won a bunch of close games, but is coming off just getting shellacked by Aliquippa this past week. It was like 63-6 that Newcastle got beat by the Quips. So
good to see Newcastle, back in it here.
Yeah. Newcastle, I believe, has the most wins overall of any team in WPIAL history. So not playoff wins, just overall wins. But looking at the bracket, my preseason pick was Bell Vernon over Aliquippa. If I had to pick now, I'd say probably another Bell Vernon Thomas Jefferson rematch in the semifinals. Aliquippa and McKeesport, look like the best teams. Although this, the potential quarterfinal here between Thomas Jefferson and Hampton could be a really, really good game. But I think Thomas Jefferson's probably better in the trenches. When we talked to Hampton's head coach, he mentioned that they were a little undersized up front, but they had some good running backs, and they were fundamentally sound, but just a little undersized. But as you know as well as I do, Thomas Jefferson's size in the trenches is something that
they were the most impressive looking team of all of the teams that I saw on the field in Hershey last season. Was Thomas Jefferson. I mean, it looked like Notre Dame out there. I'm just telling you.
Yeah. So I like my preseason pick here of Bell Vernon and Aliquippa reaching the title game, but I mean, you could have 3 just fantastic games, running through here with, potentially TJ Hampton and then TJ Bell Vernon and then Aliquippa McKeesport, just to set up a championship game at Heinz Field. So
yeah, I believe that the 4A is like is the best overall of all of the classifications as far as, marquee matchups.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and remember too, so remember when we looked at 5A, how I said that only 3 teams in 5A had averaged over 30 points a game. Look here, you got 9 teams in 4A that are averaging over 30 points a game. So that's what I mean when and it's not like these defenses are bad either. I mean, top 7 are holding teams like under 16, 17
No,
points
you just have that many good teams.
Yeah, you do. All right. So now a word from our sponsors as we're halfway through.
Wow. Halfway through. Now, hopefully not halfway through the whole show, but I mean, anyway, look, Andrew Cohen, Get Recruited. Andrew and I did an update on his, why is Get Recruited consulting different than other recruiting? And you're going to see a lot of that upcoming. There's going to be a lot of guys out of the WPIAL get direct message from me, because there's been a couple guys that have signed up out there with Andrew, and just to promote the fact of just give him a call. Okay. When I see a guy send out his film, especially 2023 and 2024 guys. This is your time. This is your time to get a strategy. You got to have a plan. You got to have a game plan in football, but you also have to have a game plan for your recruiting. Andrew Cohen's the one that can give you that game plan, and give him a call. He'll talk to you about it. No obligation. 570-428-2872. So take it away there, Ian.
Okay, great. So moving on to 3A, where Central Valley is the #1 overall seed, defending WPIAL and state, two-time defending WPIAL champions, defending state champions, and the presumptive favorite once again. The only real surprise on the bracket here, I'll say, is that the interstate conference champion Elizabeth Forward and defending runner-up got the #4 seed, and Avonworth, who was the second place team in Central Valley's conference, got the #3 seed. But I think once again, they wanted to kind of split up the top two teams in that conference, and sets up a potential semifinal between North Catholic and Avonworth, who are kind of old rivals from when they both played in single A back in the 4 classification era, but both of those schools have grown a little bit and are now in 3A. So Central Valley,
three under 6, so
yeah, right. But yeah, Central Valley, defending state champs. I mean, they've looked the part this year. They've been absolutely outstanding on both sides of the ball. This team's just loaded. Sean Fitzsimmons, I call him the terror of the trenches, a Pitt commit, up front on the defensive line, just basically lived in other teams' backfields. They're just Landon Alexander, their running backs, one of the top rushers in the WPIAL. Matt Merritt started the season at quarterback. He's an outstanding linebacker. We started the season at quarterback, got hurt. Antoine Johnson came in and started slinging the ball all over the yard, and now it's just been, I mean, they're just loaded all over the place. I mean, they are, if you want to talk about a presumptive favorite, a shoe-in favorite, I mean, Central Valley is, you can write them in pen almost. It's take a Sharpie out with this one.
I was going to say the Sharpie. It's a Sharpie mode, and I can tell you that a lot of people from Wyoming watch this show just to get updates on Central Valley, man. I mean, so absolutely couldn't agree with you more.
North Catholic, my alma mater, at the #2 seed, finished undefeated this season. Pitched 7 shutouts in 10 games. Just outstanding defensively this year, and really a well-rounded team on offense. A lot of different guys that can beat you. Joey Prentice, the quarterback's a good dual threat guy. Cal Topinski kind of plays a slot role, but they hand off to him, and he's a good receiver. And they're on the lines. They've just been outstanding on the offensive and defensive lines. North's been really good this year, and I'm really excited to see if they can actually make it back to a second WPIAL championship game. They've only made one championship game in their entire history. They've lost in the semifinals 6 of the last 9 years. So we'll see if they can actually. They've made the semifinals 6 of the last 9 years. See if they can get over the hump. Yeah, they got to get over that semifinal hump. Standing in their way in the semifinals is likely Avonworth, who, like I said, they were kind of old rivals back in single A, met in the playoffs a few times and played in the same conference, competed for a conference title for a bunch of years. Avonworth had a really good season until they ran into Central Valley, and then looked like mortals again. But everyone looks like mortals against Central Valley. So good season for Avonworth, getting back after they missed the playoffs last year. Elizabeth Forward, who reached the WPIAL finals for the first time in school history last year, got the #4 overall seed. Started off the season with a couple losses, but really rolled through their conference. Good
season. They had a really good season.
It was a great story last year, and the possible semifinal matchup with Central Valley this year. Yeah, another back-to-back conference titles. Yep. Yeah. Freeport got the #5 overall seed. They're the outstanding defense for Freeport, like they always have. They really beat everyone pretty handily in conference play other than North Catholic. Another good season for the Yellow Jackets. Kind of a cool story. They got all new helmets and uniforms this year. Their quarterback, Garrett King, last year had been diagnosed with cancer and had to miss the season. And through the Make-A-Wish Foundation, Ben Roethlisberger Foundation, his wish was to get new helmets and uniforms for their team. So he helped design them. So what they're wearing was actually designed by Garrett King, who's now, his cancer's gone. He played this year. He's a senior on the team. So great story for Freeport. They take on Ambridge in the first round, who Ambridge came into the season with the second longest losing streak in the WPIAL, and they snapped that and snapped the longest conference losing streak in the WPIAL earlier this season. And they got those 2 wins, which was enough to finish 4th in the conference and make the playoffs. So great story for the Bridgers, but they're going to run into a really good Freeport team. Mount Pleasant got the number 6 seed. I mentioned earlier that, one of the surprises of week 9 was them losing to South Allegheny, but 3rd straight playoff appearance, reached the playoffs in 13 of the last 14 years, but really haven't been back to a WPIAL championship game since the mid 80s. Been a strong team in the play, strong team overall, but haven't really broken through in the playoffs. They take on a Burrell team who we talked about earlier on the streak breaking side. It's their first playoff appearance since 2012, breaking an 8-year playoff drought, which was one of the longer ones in the WPIAL. So congrats to the Burrell Bucks on getting back into the playoffs. I know their coach runs I think he calls it no huddle, no mercy, wide open offense. And they have arguably one of the coolest helmets in the entire.
I was going to say that is the coolest helmet.
Yeah. Their logo is outstanding. So Burrell takes on Mount Pleasant. In the 7th seed is Keystone Oaks, who finished 3rd behind Central Valley and Avonworth in their conference. Didn't really play any close games. I guess they had a close non-conference game against Chartiers Valley, but other than that, no real close games. Their wins, they blew teams out. Their losses, they got blown out. So, Keystone Oaks is kind of 2 sides of the coin, right? They're either blowing somebody out or getting blown out. They take on South Allegheny, who also is making their first playoff appearance since 2012. So congratulations to the Gladiators. That 2012 team featured Jesse James, who went on to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers and a couple other NFL teams. Southmoreland gets the number 8 seed and a home playoff game. Snapped a 40-year playoff drought 2 years ago, was one of the best stories. And their home stadium, Russ Grimm Stadium from the great Russ Grimm, Russ Grimm from Southmoreland. Yeah, he was on the Southmoreland team that made the playoffs in 1979, and then they hadn't made it back to the playoffs until 2019. So that was a 40-year playoff drought, which is really crazy.
That's a long time. That's a long time in football.
I think that's the longest in WPIAL history, but I'll have to double check on that one. But yeah, 40 years without a playoff appearance, but they get a home playoff game now. So we'll see what they can do, with the crowd down at the Grimm. I'm sure it's going to be rocking down there. They like to have blackouts down there because
at the Grimm.
Blackouts at the Grimm, and they take on an East Allegheny team that has just 1 playoff victory since 2000, but it is their 6th straight playoff appearance. So they have some experience being here. And we'll see what happens. That'll probably be a pretty good matchup between those 2 teams. So looking at it overall, I mean, Central Valley is the shoe-in favorites to win this whole thing. And
despite the good seasons that those other top seeds, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, Central Valley is a great team. But really, considering the how good a seasons Avonworth and North Catholic and Elizabeth Forward has had, you called them prohibitive. I'm saying, maybe not so much, not so fast.
Well, we'll see. I feel like, and here's why I want to say Central Valley is the prohibitive favorite, right? That Central Valley played Blackhawk, who's a 4A team, twice this year, actually, because one week both of them had games canceled, and so they just scheduled a head-to-head game. They're like, hey, we're only a couple miles apart, let's play each other even though we're on the schedule for later. So the first game they played, Central Valley beat Blackhawk 58-35. Second game they played, Central Valley beat Blackhawk 38-3. So both pretty well, dominant games. North Catholic also played Blackhawk and beat them 18-17. So, I mean, if you want to talk about the difference between the separation,
I'm just saying, I know, right. It's about connecting the dots. I get that.
Yeah.
Right. It's like,
and Central Valley beat Avonworth 43-6. So, I mean, there's
in the way that we've gone thus far, you would consider Central Valley the most prohibitive favorite of any of the classifications we've talked about so far.
I'd consider them the most prohibitive favorite across the entire WPIAL of any
Okay.
class we've talked about or
But
haven't talked about yet. Yes.
that's a good,
Yeah.
I mean, and I wouldn't consider that to be a bold statement. I'm just saying that,
Yeah.
that that's a
And
good one.
and as a North Catholic alum, even if
Yeah,
my
that's
alma mater gets
painful.
killed, I would love to see him just get back to the championship game. And really, this feels like, single A back in the day when Clareton was so good that it was like, if you were in single A, which North Catholic was at the time, it was like your goal was basically to get on the other half of the bracket from Clareton, because you
Yeah.
knew you weren't beating Clareton, but if you were on the other half of the bracket, at least you had a chance to make it to the championship game where you would play Clareton.
Yeah.
But it was like, you just wanted to be on that other half, and North
I
Catholic
know.
and Avonworth are the ones on the other half here.
That's okay. All
Yep.
right.
Okay,
Onward.
moving on to 2A. We mentioned it earlier, a little bit of a surprise that Steel Valley got the #1 overall seed instead of Stowe Rocks. But 16 teams made the playoffs here, so we will run through them all quickly. Steel Valley, as the #1 overall seed, has the WPIAL's leading rusher in Najee Burt, and just a really good defensive performance against Sarah Catholic. That 2016 team, they called them the Mercy Boys team because they mercy ruled everyone, including Southern Columbia, in the state championship game, which I think was the last game Southern Columbia had lost until Wyomissing beat them this year. So, that was a really good 2016 Steel Valley team. And then they actually reached 3 straight WPIAL title games, 2016, 2017, 2018, lost to Washington in 2017, then came back and won it in 2018. But this is the first time they've been back to the playoffs since then. So, good luck to the Ironmen this year as they've gotten back to the playoffs. And top overall seed, they take on Beth Center, who won a casket match against Waynesburg. Beth Center's going to get killed here. They're giving up 31 points a game and taking on the WPIAL's leading rusher. They're going to
I know. Why are they even playing a first round game? I mean,
they finished 4th in their conference.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
But this is, I'll say, another good story. Beth Center made 16 straight playoff appearances from 2003 to 2018. So they were a team that had always kind of gotten in, but hadn't made it for a few years. So they got back in. So good for them getting their
Look,
back
this
into
was
the
the
playoffs.
idea of why they put in 6 classifications, so you wouldn't have such a lopsided postseason game. But anyway.
Yeah. Southside Beaver got the #8 seed. They beat Western Beaver on Saturday of the last week of the season to get second place in the Three Rivers Conference behind Stowe Rocks. So Southside Beaver getting the #8 seed. They actually had made a run from the #8 seed to the 2018 WPIAL Championship game, although that year they got a little help that Shady Side Academy was the presumed favorite in 2A that year, and their quarterback Sky Moore, who's the only player in WPIAL history to pass and rush for 1,000 yards twice in his career, and is now lighting it up at Western Michigan as a wide receiver. But Sky Moore got hurt in the first round of the playoffs and couldn't play in the second round. And so Southside Beaver made a run from that #8 seed to the WPIAL title game in 2018 and lost to the aforementioned Steel Valley. So they're the #8 seed again. And we'll be taking on Ligonier Valley in a matchup of Rams versus Rams. Wow. Steel Valley taking on Ligonier Valley in the first round. So this is Ligonier Valley's first WPIAL playoff appearance.
Good for them.
Yep. They played in the WPIAL up until 1969 when they moved over to District 6. They won 2 District 6 titles in 2016 and 2017, reached the District 6 championship game in 2018 and 19, and lost to, I believe, Richland Township both of those years, and then came back to the WPIAL last year and made the playoffs this year. So dangerous team, actually, at 8-2 overall. Good Ligonier Valley team.
Yeah, very good. And good to see them, making the move from the WPIAL, to the WPIAL, showing some benefit here. This is the reason they wanted better competition. Now they've got it, so good for them.
Yes. Washington, as we mentioned earlier, won that thrilling game against McGuffey to win the conference title, got the #4 overall seed, have the highest scoring team in 2A, but some of that I think is because they played in a conference with some teams that were really, really bad defensively. I mean, they had, Beth Center and Waynesburg and Charleroi and Fraser. I mean, those teams were all pretty bad defensive teams. I mean, I try and be honest about teams, and I mean all those teams are giving up over over 30 points a game. And it's just, yeah. But nevertheless, Washington is a very good team, has had a lot of historical success, 7-time WPIAL champions. And, been to this their 35th playoff appearance. So they're always a threat to make a deep run
Yeah,
in
they
the
got some
playoffs.
history.
Yep. They take on a new Brighton team that won a casket match against Freedom this past week to get into the playoffs. So congratulations to the Lions on getting in. They've had to battle through a whole bunch of injuries this year. Their quarterback got injured and a couple other guys got hurt. So good on the Lions for overcoming those injuries and getting into the playoffs. Beaver Falls, the defending WPIAL champions, they lost 2 games to teams from higher classifications, the Blackhawk and Aliquippa, to start the season. I don't really, like I said earlier this year, I wasn't ready to push the panic button on them, and I was pretty much right. Their only conference loss was to Laurel. They bounced back to win their last 6 in a row, and they're really rolling. Their quarterback Jaron Brickner is playing really well right now, throwing the ball all over the place. So Beaver Falls always a dangerous team in the playoffs as well, and defending champions that only graduated 5 players from that team that won the title last year. They take on Western Beaver, so a little local Beaver County matchup here, who lost that game to Southside Beaver for the third place spot, or for the second place spot. So Western Beaver fell to third, and taking on Beaver Falls. Stowe Rocks, who we all thought was the presumed number 1 seed, and I still think is probably the favorite in 2A, got the number 2 seed, undefeated. And this team's just loaded all over the field. I mean, Stowe Rocks has been fantastic this year. They were the runner-ups last year. They lost in the WPIAL finals each of the last 2 years, interestingly, in the 1A final in 2019 and in the 2A final last year. And I would think are the favorites again to potentially win their first title since 1987. So they've lost 5 WPIAL title games since then, since 1987 when they last won one. So it would be a good story to see the Vikings win it. And they're just a great team. What's been most impressive to me has been their defense. Their defense has been outstanding this year. They take on a Shady Side Academy team who got the 1 wild card spot in the playoffs, beating Summit Academy the last week of the year to secure that spot, getting back in after missing the playoffs last year. But that, they got to go play Stowe Rocks. So yeah, good luck.
They got in, right?
They got in. Yep. Chartiers Houston had a tight defensive win over McGuffey earlier this year. And, Chartiers Houston, a pretty good defensive team. Got into the playoffs, finishing second in the Century Conference. First playoff appearance since 2016. Although they'd been a team that had kind of been a perennial team that always made the playoffs and lost in the first round. Haven't won a playoff game since 2000. They're going to take on Mohawk, who had a pretty good start to conference play, but then kind of struggled a little bit down the stretch. Got back on the right track in the last week by thumping Elwood City. So, Mohawk's a team that, just their 7th playoff appearance in school history, only 2 playoff wins in school history. So something's going to break here, right? Either Mohawk's going to win their 3rd playoff game in school history, or Chartiers Houston's going to win their first game since 2000. So something's going to happen here.
Yeah, good.
Yep. And then Laurel, who was my preseason pick to win the Midwestern Conference, and followed up and did so with a really good tandem of Luke McCoy at running back and Kobe DeRosa at quarterback. Laurel was a team
so they get the number 3 seed for being undefeated. I mean,
yeah. Well, you had 4 undefeated teams in 2A, so it was kind of tough. But Laurel. Laurel, I think, is a team that some people slept on a little bit. They played Stowe Rocks to a 1-point game in the first round last year. And I think people kind of forgot about that Laurel was up 20-0 and Stowe Rocks stormed back and won that game 21-20. I think people forgot just how good Laurel was coming into this year, because everyone's like, oh, Beaver Falls, they're defending champs. They're favorites to win the conference. And I was like, Laurel was my pick. And I was one of the only people that picked Laurel, and they backed up my pick, and they're a threat to make a run here in the playoffs as well. They get a McGuffey team in the first round, who was a team that people were a lot higher on in the preseason. If you remember from our preseason show, McGuffey was ranked in the top 10 in the state, and I said, I'm not so sure about that, because they graduated a lot of people, and I know they had a good successful season last year and won the conference title, but I was a lot higher on Laurel than I was on McGuffey. And McGuffey, but they almost won the the conference title, right? They were really close against Washington last week. It took a 20-second drive by Davon Fuse to win that game. So McGuffey's a dangerous team at the 14 seed here. I think this is probably too low for them, but just where they got seated, they're a
Yeah, not
good
a lot
team
of
that runs the
history
ball.
there either.
No, no. And then Sarah Catholic with that loss fell all the way to the 6th seed, which I mean, I thought they were the second best team.
I know.
Falling all the way to the 6th seed is rough for them. Max Rocco did leave that game early with an injury, so hopefully he's able to be okay and come back for the playoffs. And they're just loaded all over. I mean, I think Sarah's a dangerous team from this number 6 seed that could potentially make a run to at least the semifinals and get a game against Stowe Rocks, maybe all the way to the championship game. They take on a Neshannock team. It's kind of been up and down. Neshannock didn't have a lot of close games. They beat people by a lot, or they lost by a lot to Beaver. Well, no, actually, no. Beaver Falls was close. They lost by a lot to Laurel, but Beaver Falls was close. They were actually beating Beaver Falls like 23-6, and Beaver Falls came back to beat them 26-23. And they also had a narrow loss to Mohawk, which was a little surprising early in the year. So, but they beat a lot of teams by a lot of points. They can score, but have struggled to defend at times this year. And so, looking at the overall bracket, Steel Valley should roll into the semifinals. That Washington Beaver Falls game in the quarterfinals is going to be a great matchup. And Stowe Rock should roll to the semis. A Laurel Sarah Catholic game here in the quarters would also be just a fantastic matchup.
That would be pretty wild.
Yeah, and I mean a Laurel Sarah game with the winner getting Stowe Rocks is just, I mean, that's just a murderer's row of teams on that bottom half of the bracket to try and get through. But I mean, with 4 undefeated teams plus Beaver Falls is the defending champs, and then Sarah Catholic, I mean, you're 6 teams deep here that all have a chance to win the title. I mean, I think there's 6 excellent teams here in 2A that all have a shot to win it.
And I think that the 2A champion of the WPIAL, quite honestly, in my mind, would be a favorite to win the PIAA championship, because obviously this isn't the same type of Southern Columbia team, juggernaut teams that they've had in the past. There's definitely some kinks in the armor, and from what I've seen from 2A in the WPIAL, I mean, there's some good teams around the state, but I'd give the WPIAL 2A champ, that would be my favorite to win the state championship.
Yeah, I think Farrell up in District 10 is pretty darn good too. Their running back Anthony Stallworth's been really good this year. So whoever comes out of the west side, I think it's gonna be like the WPIAL champ, Farrell, and Southern Columbia are probably the top 3 in whatever order you want to put them in.
Watch out who comes out of District 3 as well. I mean, I've seen a couple of really good teams out there as well. So
yeah. And moving on to 1A. We mentioned Leechburg snapping their 32-year playoff drought with the highest scoring team in the classification at 45 points a game. And so a lot of teams have scored a lot of points here. But if you notice, a lot of them are from the Tri-County South, which, as we've talked about, have some of the softer defenses. Carmichael's, California, West Green all averaging over 35 points a game. But if you look on the flip side, you have, West Green's holding teams to 15 points and Carmichael's is at 18, California is at 20. And so, good offenses, but defense is a little further down the list as well. And this is the interesting thing. I think this 1A bracket, I mean, Clairton's the number 1 overall seed, but they haven't been as offensively dominant as in years past. I mean, last year they were averaging like 54 points a game, and this year they're down to like 27. So, Clairton's defense has been outstanding. But this is truly a wide open bracket. Like
just like actually, 1A is wide open, I think statewide. I think that Steel High show that they're definitely beatable. Not to kind of segue into a state kind of show, but I think 1A and 2A are as wide open state tournaments as there have been in some time.
Yeah, so we'll run through these all quickly. Clairton, 16th consecutive playoff appearance. They've won 10 of the last 15 WPIAL titles. So they're just, they're a force, and their defense is so good this year. They've held a lot of really good offenses in check. So, I mean, to beat Clairton is going to take an outstanding performance. Bishop Canavan is the number 3 seed. And I actually think they are probably my favorites potentially to win this one.
Wow.
I mean, they lost a close, I think it was a 20-13 game to Clairton. And Clairton scored 2 defensive touchdowns in that game. So I really like Canavan's chances this time around. Leechburg. So this one actually is not in order. Sorry. This is in order by conference, not by who's playing who.
Okay.
But Leechburg, sorry, I forgot to switch the slides around. Leechburg, number 7 overall seed, making the playoffs for the first time since 1988, snapping that long losing streak. Haven't won a playoff game since 1978, but get their first home playoff game in school history. So that's pretty cool for the Blue Devils.
It is.
Greensburg Central Catholic. They're the team I mentioned earlier, with all those transfers from Jeanette that potentially, are going to look completely different in the playoffs than they looked in the regular season. So kind of a question mark as far as GCC is concerned. Springdale had some injuries earlier in the year, but have bounced back late in the year, won a casket match against their rivals Riverview in the last week of the season to make the playoffs. Potentially dangerous as a 13 seed because they're taking on West Green, who was the Tri-County South champions, but West Green lost to Burgettstown earlier this year, who finished like 5th in the Big 7 conference. So you never know how they stack up when they have to play against other conferences. From the Big 7 conference, we have Cornell, who got the number 2 overall seed, conference champions, lost the final week of the season against Olsh, but was the best team out of that conference all season. They got their first playoff win in school history 2 years ago in 2019. So they'll be looking for their second playoff win in school history this year. And this is their first conference title since 1983. Rochester got the number 5 overall seed. And, they were one of the from 1990 to 2010, were one of the dominant teams in the entire WPIAL. And even state, they won 3 state titles in that time too. 3 in 5 years from 98 to 2001. So we're a really good program and have been very good this season, but lost a close game to Cornell, lost a game to Union early in the year. So it's going to be, Rochester's a dangerous team come playoff time because they can always run the ball and play defense. Our Lady of the Sacred Heart. Olsh, yeah. They were a team early in the year that I thought could potentially, vie for a championship. They lost a couple close games, won a couple close games. I feel like every game Olsh has played has been close. So could go either way, but they're also kind of battle tested, have a good quarterback in Nehemiah Azim. So we'll see what they can do come playoff time. They got the number 9 overall seed against that Greensburg Central Catholic team that I mentioned earlier, that's going to have a completely different look because they have all different players. But that also means a potential second round matchup with Clairton. Shenango got in with a 3-6 overall record because they won tiebreakers basically to get in out of the Big 7 conference. Got the number 11 seed, but they're taking on a Carmichael's team from the Tri-County South. So anytime you face a team from the TCS, it gets interesting when they cross over. Burgettstown, I mentioned earlier, also got in. They won a casket match against Fort Cherry. Had 5 straight playoff appearances from 2015 to 2019, which snapped a pretty long playoff drought for the Blue Devils as well. But they also won a playoff game in that span too, which was their first playoff win in a long time. So Burgettstown had some success in 2A, moved down to 1A, missed the playoffs last year, but are back in this year. Got the number 14 seed and drew a very good Bishop Canavan team in the first round. West Green, the Tri-County South champions, 4th playoff appearance in 5 years, which for them is very, very good. They were one of the bottom teams in the WPIAL for a while. And have really turned things around down there in West Green. Made it to the semifinals in 2019, which was their 3rd semifinal appearance in school history. So Pioneers got the number 4 seed, and we'll see what happens when they get into the playoffs. They have a really good sophomore running back who we talked about last week in Colin Brady, who already surpassed 2,000 yards for his career. So he's a guy to keep an eye on as well. Carmichael's, the Mighty Mikes, quarterback Trenton Carter ran and passed for over 1,000 yards each of the season. So the 12th player in WPIAL history to join the 1,000 club. Congratulations to Trenton. Got the number 6 overall seed for the Mighty Mikes and get a Shenango team in the first round. So we'll see what happens there. Carmichael's has been really, really good offensively this year. That they've been lighting everybody up that they've played. California, they've I feel like this team's getting slept on a little bit. I feel like California is a potentially dangerous team, between Damani Stafford, their running back, Hunter Assad, their quarterback. They lost games earlier this year to West Green and to Carmichael's, and after that, they've just been killing everybody. And I feel like California
You
is
like
getting
those
slept on a
guys
little
that
bit.
those teams that are on a roll. I mean, you
Yeah,
should.
yeah. And then Mapletown, another really good story, making the playoffs for the first time since 2016. Never won a playoff game. Got the number 12 overall seed. Unfortunately, that means they have to play Rochester. But that's a matchup of two really good running backs in Sal Laurie from Rochester and Landon Stevenson from Mapletown, who was one of the top rushers in the
Oh,
WPIAL.
good.
And then the last team out of the Tri-County South was Monessen, who beat Avella in a casket match. They got the 15 seed, so they get Cornell in the first round. They'd been a team that, like you can see here, reached the playoffs in 26 out of 29 years, and had kind of been a perennial playoff team. But missed the playoffs the last 2 years. So Monessen's kind of been rebuilding their program. So making it to the playoffs is certainly a big accomplishment for the Greyhounds this year. So just looking at the bracket here, like I said, I think, I like Olsh in the first round. West Green and Springdale. Springdale's been playing better. They got those guys back from injury. West Green's been able to run and throw the ball against those soft Tri-County South defenses, but I think Springdale also plays a bit better defense. I think Springdale's better than the 13th overall seed at 6-4, but just kind of how the seeds shook out. So we'll see what happens there. Springdale, I think, has a chance to pull the upset there. I really like Rochester's chances to make it to the semifinals. A Rochester Clareton semifinal would be, just packed with storylines, just because those two teams have met so many times over the years in the playoffs. California, like I said, could be dangerous, but they face a Leechburg team that's been really good playing at home, broke that long playoff streak, or playoff drought, I should say. So Leechburg potentially has a chance to win that first playoff game since the 1970s. And then, Cornell's been really good defensively, but just lost to Olsh this past week. So, I really don't know. I mean, I don't know if Leechburg's good enough to make the semifinals and beat Cornell, but we'll see what happens there. And then I really like Bishop Canavan to come out of the bottom half of the bracket and make it to Heinz Field. And I think if Bishop Canavan gets another shot at Clareton, like I said, they played them tight the first time around. If they get another shot at them, I think they have the offense to score and to beat Clareton. And Canavan's trouble the first time was they turned the ball over. Like I said, Clareton had 2 defensive touchdowns in that game. If Canavan doesn't turn the ball over, I think they might have beat him the first time around. So that concludes our show, our run through all of the playoff teams. I hope everyone enjoyed all the information that we threw at you this week. And we'll be back next week to talk about, all of the first round playoff results.
Yeah, I was, I guess the good part about it is the fact that, we got through each particular classification. Look, let's just be honest with you. Most likely people are going to fast forward to the classification that they want to watch, but they can watch every classification that they choose to. And I think that's the best part about what you did, Ian, is that you showed in detail each particular classification. And each particular, of all those teams that are in there, you did a really great job analyzing not only the type of season that they had, but their first round matchup that they have. And gosh, moving on, I'll tell you what, that 1A classification, obviously Clareton as the number 1 seed, but that could be, very wide open. 3A and 4A, my God, just, teams with, really good records. It's just going to be so much fun to watch for me.
Yep. I'm excited for it. So thanks a lot to everyone for watching. Thanks to our sponsors, and we'll be back next week.
All right, my man. I'm gonna if you could go back to the thing there.
Yep, we'll put up how to find us. So if you're watching this, you've obviously found us on YouTube, but follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. And check out steelcityblitz.com, where we'll have breakdowns for all of the playoff matchups as well.
All right, for my man Ian, I'm Badge. Hey, we'll see you next week. We'll actually have playoff results to talk about. Until then, take care. Talk to you later. Bye now.